Thank you for coming over with our expert, Dr. Das, Shaun. He's been a friend of the channel for many, many years now. He's got his own YouTube channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. All of Dr. Das's links are in the description box below this video. And he's been rising up on YouTube. But if you go over and subscribe, it does incentivize our guests to come back to this channel as well as they grow bigger and bigger. So first off, huge thank you for coming back on.
It's an absolute pleasure, Shaun. It's been a while, isn't it? It's been maybe a year or so. I can't remember. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And I've been watching on your channel. You've done various videos now on P. Diddy's situation. So can I just, before we get into it deeper and do the psychoanalysis, psychiatric side, when this indictment came down and he was put in jail, they denied 50 million bail. I mean, were you surprised by what was happening at that moment in time?
The fact that he got denied bail, you mean?
Just that it all just came out that he'd been doing this stuff and they weren't going to let him out on bail.
So no is the short answer to that, because there's been a string of high-profile, famous celebrity men who've done something so similar, haven't there? So, you know, everything from Russell Brand, R. Kelly, Epstein, all of these people. So, I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that every single person in that position abuses their power, but enough do that it's not surprising when a new person comes out a few times a year. So it's not that surprising. If it's Diddy specifically, I mean, you know, I think I had vaguely heard some slightly dodgy things about him on various videos on the internet, but then again, you can hear a lot of rumor and speculation. So it wasn't like he was waving massive red flags like someone like R. Kelly might. So I'm not hugely surprised overall. In terms of bail, I would say that I'm not surprised. The reason being is because there are specific reasons why a judge would put somebody on bail as opposed to being on remand. Obviously, the serious nature of their crime is probably the main factor. And I think it's fair to say that Diddy has, you know, extremely serious allegations against him. The one thing that I think is a bit contentious, and I'm going to say something that's a bit controversial, is that another reason is if you think that they're either a flight risk or they're a huge risk to the public at the moment, at this moment in time, as in they need to be in prison right now for the trial, because if you let them out on bail during the trial, they'll go and offend. I would argue, and this is the controversial bit, that he's not that risky right now. I think he has absolutely been risky over all these years, but he's narcissistic and he's intelligent enough to not do something to further jeopardize his already precarious situation by offending right now. So I think he's relatively safe right now. And I also don't think he's that much of a flight risk. I think that's arguable. I mean, he's certainly got the resources to get a private jet and to fly off to somewhere where he's not going to be extradited. So I think you could argue that he might at least consider that. But at the same time, if he does do that, then he's excommunicated from America probably for the rest of his life. So it depends on how much he believes there is the strength of the evidence against him.
So, Shaun, do you think there is a culture of this that has been protected for years and now it's just all coming out of the woodwork?
Yeah, absolutely. So you could argue that Jimmy Savile was like the first domino to fall. I think that there are always men that abuse their power in any who get to the top of their fields, whether it's show business, whether it's being celebrity, whether it's just CEOs. There's always going to be people like that. And I think they are protected to a degree. I think it's all to do with money, Shaun. So, you know, if you're a multi-millionaire like Diddy is, and you've got friends in high places, then they will turn a blind eye and they will protect you to a degree because they get your attention, they get your friendship, they might actually make money from you and your enterprises. And only when everybody else starts turning do you either wash your hands from them and distance yourself, or take it even further and actually give evidence against that individual.
Yeah, that is so true, because they're a brand, aren't they? And you've got all these vested interests that have supported them from their inception. And then you've got millions, you know, over the years. These brands become worth millions, multi-millions, and then billions if they get to the absolute top. And I think he was near $1 billion. So can you imagine how many people's careers and how many people he employed who had a vested interest in his continued success, and this not coming out? And what we see, like with Savile, all these people rallied around to cover up and protect Savile over the years. And only after his death, when he was no longer as valuable to the likes of the BBC, that's when it was allowed to come out, when it wasn't going to cause as much harm to the club. So it seems that protecting the brand while all these horrible things are going on and allowed to continue. These people are kind of like co-conspirators in these evil deeds, wouldn't you say? Enablers.
Yeah. They absolutely were responsible. One thing I would say, and just be crystal clear, I'm absolutely not excusing their behavior at all, but I would say that it's something that happens so gradually that it's hard to. I suppose what I'm trying to say is if everybody knew that Diddy was somebody who perpetrated SA, I'm not going to say the word, and the same with Jimmy Savile, if they knew that immediately without any doubt from day one, then I'm sure loads of people, if not everybody, would have spoken up. But the problem is it kind of creeps in insidiously over a really long period of time. It's like rumors and then more rumors and then things that you might see at Diddy's party, but then you don't see it fully because you don't go upstairs or you don't go downstairs, whatever it is. So again, I'm not trying to excuse what anybody protecting them, but I'm the point I'm trying to make is that it's hard to know exactly until it's a bit too late. And as that time passes, as you've known that individual for years, your career is invested into their activities. So I think people are selfish and they turn a blind eye because they've invested so much time and effort in their own careers to tie themselves into this brand.
Indeed, well said. This is how these things get to continue for so long. So if you've got questions about the Diddy story, questions for Dr. Das, drawing Ozzy's expertise, please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to get Dr. Das to tell us a little bit more about his expertise so he can let you guys know what qualifies him to be talking about this and where he's particularly an expert, what areas he's particularly an expert in.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm a forensic psychiatrist, which means, and I act as an expert witness. So basically when somebody commits quite a serious offense, anything from assault to actual murder, I will assess that individual in prison and I'll look at their psychiatric state, if they have a mental illness like schizophrenia, which is only a small proportion, or certain personality traits. So I think my kind of expertise in what the videos that I've made about Diddy are about his personality traits and what the common traits are in people that commit these kind of offenses.
What personality traits of Diddy stand out the most to you?
So I think that anybody that has this level of committing SA and has all these wild sex parties and orgies, it's no coincidence that these people tend to gravitate in higher ends of society. It's no coincidence they tend to be very, very rich, and some of them tend to be celebrities. So I think a proneness to boredom is one personality trait, and if they can get access to sex really, really easily over many, many years, I think they build a tolerance towards sex, so they need something even more kinkier to kind of get the same hit. A bit like a drug addict, they always chase that same high when they first take heroin or crack. So I think individuals like Diddy need a bit of a challenge, so they don't just want to sleep with a woman because they've done that 1,000 times. They want to sleep, they want to have an orgy, and they want to have different genders put in. They want all kinds of nasty sexual practices, and sexuality has got a lot to do with it as well. I think if there's strong evidence that he's bisexual as well. So that's what I'd say in terms of the actual sex. But in terms of Diddy himself, the things that stand out to me is his narcissism. So I believe that he might have at least some of the traits of narcissistic personality disorder. Obviously, I've not assessed him in person, but some of what he does exhibits those traits. So inflated sense of self-importance, like a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, everything from his extravagant lifestyles and also his conflict with other people. I think that's something that's not unusual for a rapper, let's put it that way. But he's had loads of high-profile beefs with other celebrities, Aaliyah, Jennifer Lopez, Tupac, obviously, probably be one of the biggest ones. And I suppose you could argue that most rappers have this bravado and braggadocio, and they sort of show off and talk about being the best. And I get that. That's part of what hip hop culture is. But I think Diddy's narcissism goes beyond that. So it's not just in his music; it's also in the way of him like wanting attention, captivating audiences, also being quite exploitative. So there's loads of stories or rumors about him exploiting others for his own gain to make him to sort of get a head up in the music business. So all of those things, lack of empathy as well, I've not really mentioned. So again, obviously what he's doing when he's committing SA and R-wording all those people, clearly that's a lack of empathy. There's no question about that. But separate to that, he's been criticized for being indifferent towards the suffering of other people.
So Don Blanchard has sent in a question. Does it make a difference if minors are involved? It's going to make a hell of a difference to his legal situation, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that there's sort of two aspects. There's his legal situation, so how long he's going to be in prison for, length of the sentence, and there's his reputational damage. So not just in prison where he might be targeted. That's a whole new topic, which I'm happy to talk about. But what's going to happen after he's been released, and it's already really, really damaged, clearly. But if there are minors involved, then that's going to make the latter thing, well, both aspects, the legal and reputational damage, far, far worse. I suppose when you're looking at the psychological aspects, you could say that if he was committing SA on minors, on top of everything else that we know is alleged about him, and I should stress the alleged bit, then that just shows power and dominance, really. There's no, apart from being the PDF file word, apart from being sexually attracted towards younger people, the only other reason that people commit that is to exert power and control.
Right. So our next question then, and this is kind of a reoccurring theme, and it's also something that Suge Knight brought up. I don't know if you've seen the Suge Knight podcast that he did recently talking about this, Shaham. So Vic R has said, would he have once been a victim born into it? Well, Suge Knight made him far more serious allegations, saying that to rise up the ranks in this line of work, you get indoctrinated by people who compromise you. And some of the ways they compromise you is to SA and R word you and film it, to have you engage in things that you wouldn't normally engage in with members of both sexes and possibly underage. I'm trying to phrase all this very carefully. So Suge Knight is saying that Diddy has gone from being initiated in that fashion to initiating others in that fashion. Now, from your expertise, when someone's gone through something horrific like that, is it then more likely that they will turn around and do it to other people?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a well-known pattern for people who suffer different forms of abuse, whether it's physical, whether it's sexual, any kind of abuse when they're younger, especially in their formative years. So I'm talking about pre-adolescence. There's definitely a pattern of some, not all, but some people repeating that. And that's basically for a number of reasons. So sometimes they literally mimic or they recreate the situations that they were in, or sometimes they kind of the normal boundaries that we have for healthy relationships just aren't formed. So they don't understand the difference between sex and emotion. So if you were, SA'd by your parents, for example, or by older people in the community regularly when you're young, then you don't understand the difference. You don't understand what is normal and what's not. What's the difference in affection? What's the difference in sex? As to whether that happened specifically to Diddy, it's really hard to know for definite, isn't it? Because for every person that goes through that experience, only a small proportion actually go on to offend themselves. And for every person that offends in that way, only a relatively small proportion has those experiences. Now, the problem for me as a forensic psychiatrist is to know like what proportion or what the rough percentage is. And it's just almost impossible to know because studies are so unreliable because people don't report it. People are either really ashamed of those experiences or conversely, and I've seen this in my own clinical practice, sometimes they lie or exaggerate about their own background because they think that it makes them makes people a bit more empathetic towards them, and it makes what they did a bit more excusable. So sometimes people, either make it up or exaggerate things because they want pity when they're going through the court process. So it's a really unreliable thing to know statistically. But I can speak from my own personal experience of all the people that I've assessed in prison for trials and written like court reports on. A huge proportion, like well over 3/4, have some form of abuse in their childhood. So it's really common in violent offenders.
Which ties into the next question about where does one cross the line from victim. Now, if we look at the Epstein case, there was a legal quagmire for prosecutors because some of the girls who were brought in and had these heinous things happen to them were then put into play in a kind of pyramid scheme whereby Maxwell and Epstein would have them procure other girls. So they went from, survivors of this horrible stuff to procuring.
Yeah.
And I think those girls they were worried they were going to be in a lot of legal trouble, but I think they ended up going against Maxwell, and as the chief procurer, she's the one who got sent down. And Maxwell herself even tried to play that card, the victim card, and blame it on Epstein. So in Diddy's case, then, did he cross the line from victim?
See, I would argue that it isn't a line, and what I mean by that is I think you can be both at the same time. I think you can be a victim and a perpetrator. So you can, and I think you should be held responsible for your actions, even if you were a victim at one point. So first of all, just to make the point crystal clear, we don't know whether Diddy was a victim for definite. I mean, it's been insinuated by Shug. I'm not sure if he's that reliable because he, I think he likes to stir shit basically, doesn't he? And he's always had something against Diddy. So just because he says it doesn't mean it's necessarily true, but it could be true. I'm just saying we can't rely on him. So if Diddy was a victim of these different types of assault when he was younger, I still think he's in control of his actions. So even though there might be some explanation, and that might years down the line come out in therapy, that might sort of help him get over some of his own psychological hang-ups, that is separate, in my view, to his criminal responsibility. So I suppose what I'm saying is I don't think there is a line. I don't think it is either you're just a victim or you're just a perpetrator. And again, going back to Epstein and the women that he was using, I think they were both. I think they were victims because they were, treated horribly and went through these horrific experiences, but I also think they knew what they were doing when they were procuring other women. Now, there might have been reasons for that. It might be that they were trying to impress him. It might have been sort of financial gain. It might have been that they were in fear of the repercussions if they didn't go along and do what they were told to do. There could be loads of background reasons, but I still believe that they're in control of their actions and need to be tried in that way.
Yeah, so trauma, childhood trauma, whatever trauma, it can explain root causes of things, but you can't use it as a cop-out to excuse you from your crimes. So
yeah, absolutely.
we got over 1,000 watching live now across all of the various platforms. I'm with Dr. Shaun Das, and he has his own YouTube channel, A Psych for Sore Minds. So please support his work. He comments on a lot of breaking cases, tons of content on his channel, and he's been a friend of this channel for many, many years. So get your questions in for him now. Let's draw on his expertise, please, folks. So yesterday there was news, we covered it last night, that there's now an investigation in the UK and that people are coming over here from the US federal government and they're looking and trying to put the feelers out to see if there are survivors in this country. And
from Diddy,
are you aware? Yeah, from Diddy. Are you aware of any of this?
Okay. No. I've been following it a little bit, but I've been a bit busy with work, so I didn't hear about that breakthrough yesterday.
All right. So Luke Green, I will refer you to the video we did last night where we covered Diddy's relationship with celebs in the UK, including Elton John, some of the royal family, etc. All right. So you're also getting asked, Shaun, about the role of psychopathy and misogyny in this Diddy case.
Yeah. So misogyny is easy to answer. So absolutely. So if you misogyny by definition is a negative viewpoint of women and not treating them as equal and viewing them as sex objects. So clearly, if these allegations are true, then clearly there's an element of misogyny. I mean, we should point out the fact that he does deny everything and he's not been tried yet, but we've also seen the video with Cassie. So we know there's at least some misogynistic behavior there. Is he a psychopath? Now, generally, I think the term psychopath is overused and is misappropriated, and people just call people psychopaths who do something that they can't understand, and it's far more complicated than that. But having said that, I think there's a fairly strong argument of Diddy at least having some of the traits of psychopathy. So I'll go through a few of them for you, and we can unpick them together. So a true psychopath is more than just being impulsive and aggressive and not caring about other people and lacking empathy. Those are just the basic antisocial traits. On top of all that, a true psychopath is really manipulative. They're really deceitful, and they're really good at taking advantage of people around them to sort of get up in whatever system they work in. So whether that's like a drug dealer using violence, or whether it's a CEO, it's a very well-known fact that loads of people in the corporate world are psychopaths. I mean, Diddy was very successful in the music business, and it's a very, very competitive business. He made a shitload of money, and he did it at quite a young age. So it's very possible that he is a psychopath and he is sort of manipulative to that degree, and he has used other people. They also tend to be quite sexually promiscuous. They have a proneness for boredom. And they sort of lack fear, and they need constant stimulation. So I think all of these things do fit into what we know about Diddy as well. So I can't say definitively without assessing him in person, but he's certainly got a lot of the traits. So it wouldn't surprise me if he was a clinical psychopath.
So one of the biggest stories from this saga pertains to Justin Bieber. And I'm just going to put this on the screen right now, one of the articles here, and get your comment on it. I mean, if you look at Justin Bieber's eyes, you've dealt with so many people, Dr. Das, who've gone through childhood trauma. I mean, just looking at him, would you say that he's a troubled soul?
Is that him in the pink shirt?
Yep.
Oh, wow. It looks completely different. Okay. I would be reluctant, sorry to not to stealthily try and shift your question, but I'd be reluctant to make a judgment on somebody's trauma just from one picture, simply because like a picture can be completely out of context. It could be that he was like grimacing and just about to smile. So I can't make too many, I can't make too many assumptions just from a photo. So sorry, I can't really answer that.
I think what's led to this, there's clips going around of when Justin Bieber was in his mid-teens. I don't know if you've seen any of them, where he seems to be getting body bumped
with Diddy, you mean?
and manhandled with Diddy and his cronies, and they're giving him an expensive car. And just reading between the lines there's a lot of concern for Justin Bieber, which leads to this question to you from Martha. Dr. Das, thank you. Can you comment on what Justin Bieber may be going through regarding guilt?
Yeah. So I saw another video. I think I've seen little clips of what you're talking about with him and Diddy, but I've seen another video by somebody called Patrick CC or something. He makes really good YouTube videos about Justin Bieber's background and how he's, I think, sexualized, the best way to put it. So ever since he was a teenager, there's loads of interviews of him when he's 15, 16, and people, both men and women, are being very overtly sexual with him. So some of it's kind of done half as a joke. I think he just was very good looking. It still is, but it was very good looking when he was younger. He had a kind of boyishness about him, and it just seemed that people were okay crossing a boundary with being a little bit over familiar with him. So I've seen clips from this documentary of women who, he's like 15 years old and they're in their 20s and they're making sort of sexually suggestive comments, and it's all kind of laughed off because he's male and they're female. So it's clearly in society, it's not seen as bad as the other way around. But there's something a bit weird that he gravitates, that I don't think it's his fault, but there's something that makes people like him gravitate. People who are overly sexualized towards him gravitate towards him. As to whether he's feeling guilt or not, it's really hard to say. And again, I don't want to speculate. I don't know how much he's involved in all of this. I mean, him and Diddy were pretty tight. That doesn't necessarily mean that Diddy definitely opened up to what he was doing behind closed doors, because I think Diddy is clever and manipulative enough to know who is on his side. And what I mean by that is he's got hundreds of celebrity friends, right? And he must, in the lifestyle that he has, he's known to throw all these parties. He must come across loads of celebrities all the time. And it would be illogical for him to immediately invite them all to his freak-offs and parties and stuff like that. It's just too high risk, because if he did that right from the beginning, he's going to tell the wrong person and they're going to leak it pretty much straight away. And I think he's more psychopathic and more intelligent than that. So I think that he knows, he's able to kind of pick out the vibe of different individuals. Maybe after one meeting, maybe he meets them on a regular basis, and he knows the ones that have a bit of a sexual perversion, and he knows the ones that he can let into his freak-offs and stuff like that. So all of this is a long way round of saying I don't know whether Justin Bieber was part of that or not. I'm afraid it will only be speculation until more evidence comes out. What do you think, Shaun? Do you think Justin Bieber was privy to what was going on behind the closed doors at the party?
Well, the videos of him as a kid, getting the body bump and almost groped by these guys, just looks absolutely sickening. So what I'll do is I'll read you what some insiders have revealed recently. And one said, Justin feels like there is no one that he can talk to that understands. And to be honest, he doesn't even fully understand. He was a kid. He said that the fallout comes amid his current struggles to try and be a good parent, having not had the best example from his own father, Jeremy Bieber. Justin is stressed right now, the insider continued. He has a baby boy and is trying to be a good dad without having anything to reference what a good father is. The source added, he is sailing these waters alone, and everyone fears that if Hailey shows any struggles with being a first-time mom, then this is going to be incredibly difficult for Justin. Diddy could not have happened at a worse time, as he is trying to experience the joy of being a father with the pain of having to deal with all of this. And Bieber announced the birth of his first child on August 23rd, giving fans a glimpse of the baby's tiny foot and his wife Hailey's hands. Welcome home, Jack Blues Bieber, he penned in the caption. And they were sharing posts on Instagram. I mean, look at that picture. That's just, I don't know, doesn't look right to me.
I agree, but that's because we know in retrospect what we know, right? So we're looking at it with hindsight bias. If it was just another, say if that was Kanye West in exactly the same situation, I don't think, well, Kanye West is a bit of a crazy dude himself, although there's no like sexual allegations against him, but we wouldn't think there's anything untoward. It's just, I think it's because we know what we know.
Yeah, but saying, let's go spend 48 hours together and giving him an expensive car, you're quite right. In the context of what we know now, it does seem quite sinister. All right, we've got almost 1,500 watching live. So get your questions in for Dr. Das. I think we're just going to go to the hour. We've got another 30 minutes. So please get your questions in. Let's draw on his expertise. Now, with the Epstein case, we saw, you know, people were saying Epstein and Maxwell were just mid-level, and it was predicted the feds would come in and protect the higher-ups. And Wendy is wondering, bigger fish are behind him. Where did he get all that money from? His music is crap. I've heard better busking. Do you see a bigger picture here, Shaham? And do you bet that it will play out like Epstein? The feds will protect the tapes, the freak-offs, and anyone from this political elite class. It won't go as high as that, like, you know, Bill Clinton distance himself, etc., from Epstein.
So I think, right, first of all, let's take the first point about him making the money. I don't think that in itself proves that he's got like a machine behind him. I think that him making all his money is because he's actually quite a shrewd businessman. So things like, for example, and he got the piss taken out of him at Suge Knight many years ago in one of the music awards because of this, because he would go on the tunes of artists like Biggie and just do a little bit like take that, say these really weird things in the background and make these noises, and it'd be in the videos. And he actually did that so he would get some of the like producing credits and some of the writing credits in the song. So that's just a very small example. I think that he's very, very shrewd. So the point I'm trying to make is I think he's made his money because he's really good at playing the game, because he started off early and because he knew exactly which artist to exploit from a really early part in his career. I don't think that in itself means there's a machine behind him. As to whether there are bigger people that will protect him, I suppose the answer to that is completely dependent on what he's got and who he's got it against. So if he's done a bit of an Epstein, and again, these are just allegations at this point, but if he's had all these freak-offs and if there are some very high-profile people that have attended, and if he had the sort of temerity and the foresight to record any of it, so if he has evidence against him, then absolutely he will be protected by the higher echelons in society. But if he doesn't have that, or if he does have high profile guests, but they don't think there's any sort of evidence of their attendance or involvement, then I think the opposite will happen. I think they'll want to wash their hands from him. I think they'll see him as a threat. So it really can go either way, depending on the evidence that he may or may not have and the strength of that evidence.
All right, so we've got a question tying into what we've just been talking about from Ken Dodd. I completely vehemently disagree with what went on with Diddy, but can the doctor explain an individual's responsibility to protect themselves whilst bearing in mind the age of criminal responsibility?
I don't quite understand that. I don't quite understand the question. What does that mean?
Ken Dodd, can you expand on your question, please? And we will get that one to Dr. Das. There's quite a lot of questions coming in right now, so I could move in.
Sure.
Move on
I
to
know
the
the
next
age
one.
of criminal responsibility is 10, but I don't know how that's relevant to Diddy's case.
All right, here's an interesting one from Seeger Frog. Do you think some celebrities who partied with Diddy will get into trouble despite them not knowing the extent of the depravity going on behind closed doors? So
I think what
guilt
will
by
happen.
association.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, regardless of what went on behind closed doors, he was very popular. He was known as a party guy, and he's brushed shoulders with hundreds of celebrities, probably several hundred celebrities, and many of them would have gone to his parties. Out of those, I think most of them would actually be quite innocent. They wouldn't know what's going on. I think that they were freak-offs that happened sort of later on behind closed doors. But he also, on top of that, had normal big parties. So I think that there'll be loads and loads of celebrities that would have gone. And I think that it'll be really hard for us to know, unless there's evidence, unless he's recorded something, and that's just speculation, but it's not unfeasible. Unless there's any evidence, it's really hard to know exactly who knew what. So I've definitely seen short videos on YouTube, TikTok, that kind of thing, YouTube shorts about people who said, I've been to a Diddy party, but I had absolutely no idea what was going on at the after party kind of thing. So I think that there'll be a lot of speculation about who's involved and to what extent, but what I'm less sure about is the actual hard evidence. Because it's easy for somebody to say, oh, look, here's a picture of Diddy looking wasted and he's with this other high profile rapper, for example, therefore the rapper must be involved. But that could also just be quite an innocent picture because he had normal parties as well. So it's going to be really, really messy, and it's going to be very difficult to exactly know who's involved to what extent.
So a huge part of this story has been the fact that Diddy, when he was incarcerated, was immediately put on suicide watch.
Yeah.
Would you consider that abnormal? Because in my experience, I saw people get put on suicide watch right after they received big sentences.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting aspect of this case. I think it is specifically to do with who Diddy is and his celebrity status. So I've worked as a psychiatrist in prisons before I was an expert witness. And as you'll know yourself, Shaun, there are systems in place in prisons, mental health counselors, there's prevention protocols for people that are deemed to be high risk of trying to take their own lives. So specifically, there's like cells with furniture that's designed so they can't cut themselves, so they can't hang themselves, they don't have access to things like cutlery. There's regular checks within mental health teams. I used to carry out some of them myself. And there's a thing called a healthcare unit. So not all prisons have them, but I know for a fact that where Diddy is right now, Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center does have a healthcare unit. So as you just said yourself, I think the risk of suicide for anybody, not just Diddy, but the risk of taking one's life is at its highest right after a court case, when they're literally just getting used to accepting the sentence they're facing. I actually don't think that Diddy's at that higher risk of taking his life of suicide now. I'd say it's actually relatively low at this moment because he's such a narcissist and he is so kind of arrogant and boastful that I think in his head, he thinks that he's got a decent chance of beating the case. Now, unless there is evidence that we the public don't know about, that he knows about. So unless whatever there was, clear videos in that he's kept for whatever reason, for his own perverse reason, on his computer, for example, and he knows for a fact the feds have got them. If he's 100% sure that he's going to be found guilty, then in that specific situation, he'd be at a very high risk of suicide. So that begs the question: why was he put on suicide watch? I can see by one of your viewers has stated that he's been taken off it now, and for me, it's because of politics. I think that's the main reason. It's not because they think that he's actually that high risk, but if they got it wrong, and if there's a small chance and he does do something silly like hurt himself or take his life, it's going to look so bad for the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center. It's going to be a really bad look. And I can think, this might be a bit controversial, but I do wonder whether they're doing it for his own protection. So there's going to be a lot of prisoners out there that want a piece of Diddy because of him being so famous, because of him being so rich. They might want to extort him. And as you'll know, there's a hierarchy in prison, isn't there? So people that commit the R word and that commit SA, and then especially if it's against minors, they're seen as like the bottom of the hierarchy. So a lot of people will want to be roughing him up a little bit, I think. So by putting him on suicide watch, or by putting him in the healthcare unit, it's just so much easier to keep him protected, to oversee him. It's a lot less hectic. So it's a much smaller contained unit. There's doctors and nurses. There's a high proportion of prison officers there. So I think it's just convenient more than anything, rather than logical, to have him on suicide watch.
Question from Gaelic Girl. Has the doctor seen the abuse video in the hotel corridor, and what traits does that reveal?
Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen the grainy footage. So I think that it reveals quite a lot about Diddy and his personality. So I've mentioned some of these things already. So I think that he is very impulsive. I think that he's narcissistic. He's got an inflated ego. So he obviously feels entitled. He obviously is quite misogynistic. He believes that Cassie or his sexual partners have to do exactly what he says. It's all about control and power and dominance. And if they don't obey, then he deals with them through physical punishment. So I think he is absolutely all of those things: impulsive, lacking empathy, narcissistic, very arrogant, entitled. Yeah, so all of those things.
And then Diddy just turns around and does an apology on Instagram and gets on with his life. I mean, what kind of mindset is it where people accept that? Because even with R. Kelly, after R. Kelly, the allegations came out, there were fans lined up with placards chanting, "R. Kelly, take me. R. Kelly, kidnap me." What does that tell you about society?
Well, it tells me the science is pretty fucked up, isn't it? So the first thing I'd say is there is, I mean, this is pretty obvious stuff, but there's a big difference between somebody apologizing because they got caught and somebody apologizing because they have genuine remorse, right? So the timing of Diddy's apology, it just reeks of bullshit to me. Like the very fact that he literally denied most allegations, continues to deny allegations now, unless there's evidence out there that's undeniable, and then he apologizes. So I don't think that's, and I think most people agree with me, I don't think that's a sincere apology at all. I think it's just damage control. So he's realized he's been caught. So what's the best that I can do to try and minimize this as much as possible? So that's one thing. As to why people kind of supported R. Kelly, and I don't, to my knowledge, nobody's doing that for Diddy, but it's not unfeasible that might happen. I don't know. I think he just gets some really messed up people. I think he gets some people, particularly women, who fall in love with very violent men or want to protect violent men. And I think that's because sometimes, not all, but some of these women have pretty horrific backgrounds themselves, and they gravitate towards what is familiar rather than what is safe. So they like standing up for men like this and supporting them because they themselves have been in these kind of relationships. And it's not uncommon to see women that fall in love with serial killers. So this is not like something I'm making up. There's an actual phenomenon that exists. There are loads of, I'm sure it happens the other way around as well, but it's usually women that write to and fall in love with serial killers, want to be in relationships with them. And I think it's all those things. It's that history of being the victim of violence, but now finally, possibly for the first time ever, you've got control in that relationship. So if you're the pen pal or the girlfriend of a serial killer who's behind bars, they can't physically assault you, they can't cheat on you, they can't run away, they can't do anything because they're in this controlled environment. You get to have all the power, you control the shots. So I think that's what attracts some women to people like this.
All right, so this next question from Gaelic Girl pertains to an article that came out a few days ago about the food. I'll just read you a bit of it, Dr. Das.
Sure.
So paranoid Diddy was reportedly not eating in prison out of fear of being poisoned. Larry Levine, former inmate, claims he has a source with knowledge, blah, blah, blah. Quote, imagine if someone paid someone off on the inside to actually poison his food, give him a heart attack, and he dies, and no one would really think anything of it, alleging that it may be one of the reasons he's not eating. He's really, really paranoid. He's really, really scared. Doesn't know what to think. He doesn't know who to trust or what to believe. And from my own experience, I saw people and I was aware of people who ended up in jail getting crushed glass in their food, getting hypodermic needles with hepatitis C and HIV tainted blood in their food. There was one guy, even in lockdown, who they were trying to get. They knew he had a peanut butter allergy. So they put a peanut butter and jelly sandwich under his door and caused him to go into, what is it called, prophylactic shock. Shock, yeah. It is that's it. Sorry, not prophylactic. So that is a way that food, there are many ways that food is weaponized in prison. So the question from Gaelic Girl here is, was Diddy refusing food a narc stunt in the jail? And what is your perspective on him refusing food?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to talk about what I think is going to happen to him in prison, or is happening to him in prison, and then I'll answer the questions about the food. So I think we touched on this before, but I think that so some celebrities are well respected in prison, especially if they're kind of seen as a bit cool or thug or street or hood. You know, Mike Tyson comes to mind. So in another set of circumstances, I could see that Diddy would be quite well respected in prison, but for the fact that his offences are what they are. So as we said before, he's at the bottom of the hierarchy now because of committing the R word, allegedly, of all the things he's done against women. If it transpires that minors are involved, that would put him even further down. He's already low rung on the ladder. So I think he will be targeted. I do think that one aspect for him is his wealth. So it's not unfeasible that he will have gang connections. I'm not saying that he necessarily knows gangsters or people that are in that prison, but I guarantee that he knows people who knows people that do know people that are in there. And if he's got enough money, and if he managed to make connections with the right people, I think he could actually be protected. Because even though he's the bottom of this prison hierarchy and people will want to hurt him for that, and they'll want to do exactly what you're talking about, poison his food, put glass in his food, you know, hurt him. And if he's in protective custody or in the healthcare unit, that's probably the easiest way to actually physically get to him. Even though I believe that to be true, cash rules everything around me. So I think that people will also, if people are paid enough money regularly, they will care more about protecting him. So the hierarchy kind of goes out the window if they get paid enough. And it's in their interest to continue protecting him, because the money will stop if they don't protect him. So I think it's going to be a battle of the different people in prison. I think some are going to want to hurt him for those reasons, and some are going to want to protect him. I'm not sure who's going to win. It depends on what the proportion is, what the percentage is, how much they're getting paid, etc. But he definitely will get a lot of attention in prison either way. Now, in terms of his food refusal, it's actually really hard to know what's reality versus what is paranoia or mental illness, because the reality is, if he is targeted, it might be absolutely true. It might be that people are actually trying to poison his food, and he might have caught wind of that. It might have been that there's some people that have informed him of that. Some people might have even threatened him or told him directly, this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to do. And if that's the case, if that's reality, then it makes sense that he's refusing food. You know, if you genuinely thought that people are messing with your food and are putting glass in it and God knows what, feces, God knows what in it, then yeah, I think most people would refuse their food. But equally, it could also be mental illness. It could also be paranoia. So it's not unusual for people to, especially if they're not used to prison life. I know he's got a bit of assault and stuff like that in his criminal record, but he's not a hardened prisoner by any means. So if he's used to the high life and being a millionaire and having these parties, and then suddenly overnight he's thrown into prison, then absolutely, I think it's quite natural for him to be paranoid. What's harder to know without me assessing him in person is that just everyday normal sensitivity and paranoia, or is it verging on some sort of breakdown or mental illness, which again is not unfeasible when somebody goes through that much pressure and stress. Not everybody by any means, but some people do tip over the edge. They become acutely psychotic. It's something that I've definitely seen in my career.
We've had a couple of questions come in pertaining to what you've just been talking about. If people go on hunger strike, do they end up with tubes down their nose and getting force fed?
Yes, they do eventually, but it's done way past the line as a very last resort, because I suppose they don't want to reward that kind of behavior. So if people are going on hunger strike, they don't want to give them an undue attention. So they'll do their best to ignore it for as long as possible. And when it becomes a medical emergency, so when somebody's literally fainting because they've got so little blood pressure or so weak or lacking nutrients, or they'll do blood tests regularly, and if their nutrient levels are so low that they're in medical danger, then usually they get transferred. I don't know what it's like in different prisons in the States. I think it's probably different from different states, but in the UK, certainly they would be transferred to hospitals. They wouldn't be force fed in prison. They would go to a hospital unit. Prisons hate doing this because it's just so resource intensive. They need to get at least one, possibly two prison officers with that individual 24 hours a day in that hospital, probably handcuffed to them. And they're already short staffed as it is. So they really hate doing this unless they absolutely have to. But yeah, prison officers would go with him. They would stay with him in the hospital, and he would be force fed. I think they'll first of all try and use other tactics, like giving him these kind of nutrient protein milkshakes. They're called Ensure in the UK, but you only have to have like one or two a day to stay alive, basically, because they're so nutrient dense. But if he's refusing them, then yeah, he'd probably be restrained and have an NG tube forced down him.
Because thinking in this country, a lot of prisoners died when they went on hunger strike under Margaret Thatcher, and some changes were made after that. So you talked about the hierarchy. So in the prison hierarchy,
before we move on, Shaun, can I just quickly ask you, did you see much hunger strike in your experience in prison, and how do they deal with it?
No, I didn't see any hunger strike at all. What we were basically given food that we couldn't eat. I lost about 2 stone over my 26 months on remand. So it wasn't like, you know, you couldn't eat the food anyway. You could spend $20 a week on the inmate store, and I was just living off a packet of peanuts or some peanut butter. Was like a meal for me.
Yeah.
So going over to this question. So in prison, there's a hierarchy of crimes. So at the bottom of the hierarchy are the snitches, the chomos, the people who abuse kids, the people who've done crimes against women. For example, SA and R word crimes against kids are KOS, for people coming in, kill on sight. A drive-by shooting, women and kids sometimes get hit. That person's probably going to get a beat down. And then at the top of the hierarchy, you've got the gang leaders. These are guys who have murdered people because to join the gang, to be a full-on member, like the Aryan Brotherhood or the Mexican Mafia, you've got to end someone's life in the jail for them. Or they're people who've committed similar crimes on the streets. Like a mafia guy who's whacked rival mafia guys, he would have a lot of respect. In fact, there was a guy called Two Tonys who was serving 140 plus years who protected me. I wrote his book. It's called The Mafia Philosopher Two Tonys. And he'd left the dead bodies of rival gangsters from Arizona to Alaska. He was a Bonanno crime family associate. And when he took me under his wing, I never had any problems after that. I was writing his life story, sneaking into his cell every day. And it was in his interest that I didn't get in any problems with anyone. So that worked out quite well. Let me see. We've done psychopathy and sociopathy.
Shall I answer that question about which crimes are at the top?
Yep, go for it.
So I completely agree with everything you said, and also you've had the lived experience, haven't you? I've only kind of gone off my experience of working in prison. So yeah, I do think that there are horrific crimes that put you permanently at the bottom of the hierarchy, like everything we've mentioned, PDF file, R word, all of that. I think there's some crimes that seem to be quite cool. They won't put you at the top of hierarchy. They won't keep you there very long because, as you said yourself, it's the gangs and the gang leaders that are at the top of the hierarchy, but they might give you a little bit of an edge up when you very first come into prison. And from my experience, that's either people that have committed some sort of offense against the police. So if you've battered like a police officer, particularly a corrupt police officer or prison officer or anybody that's seen as a pillar of authority, that gives you a bit of kudos. I think anything that's quite high profile. So for example, if you've gone on a massive police chase and it's been, you know, there's helicopters and news cameras, then you'll get a bit of kudos going in. Anything that's kind of non-violent or well, I wouldn't say victimless, but not anything to do with assault. So, you know, drug charges, that kind of thing, especially really, really big volumes, you're kind of respected. And also if your crime is acting against those at the bottom of the hierarchy, so the P word, the PDF file, if you've hurt or even killed somebody like that, I think all of those things gives you a foot up the hierarchy. But as I said, it doesn't keep you at the top there. Your behavior and your status keeps you at the top, but those things will help you when you very first go in.
Yep. All right. So next question is from Gordon Jackson. What about the video where he screamed out, "I am a savage and whatever I want, I get"? I've not seen that one. Have you?
No, I've not. I think I've read about it somewhere, I believe. But yeah, that just goes to show once again his narcissism, his ego, his sense of entitlement. Again, I'm really reluctant to take things out of context because anybody can shout something that's just being a bit stupid. There's a difference between actually shouting something because you mean it and that's your outlook and you're demanding that other people deliver it. That's one thing, and just shouting something to be silly is a different thing. So it depends what context it's in.
Jabba, no, I never met any Yakuza or Chinese mobsters when I was over in America. I would love to interview some though. All right, so Hannah, Dr. Das, what are some of the traits of those friends such as Jay-Z, Ashton Kutcher, etc.?
I think this is a difficult question to answer, because the reason I'm sidestepping this is because Diddy was so popular, because he was seen as a party guy in this kind of celebrity circle. I think he had loads of different friends that were celebrities from loads of different backgrounds. And I think that it was kind of seen as cool to hang out with him. Not now, obviously, but at one point before these allegations came out. And again, I made this point before, I think we have to understand and believe that the majority of people that he hung out with, the majority of celebrities, didn't know what was going on, because he wouldn't have invited them into his inner world, because he didn't need to. It's only the ones that he knew had the same sort of pervy outlook as him. So the reason I can't answer that question is because it's so varied. You know, different celebrities have different traits. I think you probably argue that a lot of celebrities are quite career driven, quite egotistical to become celebrities in the first place, but not all celebrities are like that. So it's quite hard to categorize them because they're so different.
We've got to be careful how we word this one, Dr. Das. So Wendy's talking about the boiled eggs in the posterior story. Any thoughts or anything to add to that, or do you want me to keep going?
I don't know what to say. It's I don't know whether it's fact or not. I can't really comment on it until we know for definite, and we will know when details will come out in the trial. All
right. Question from Healing Body and Mind. Do you think Diddy will be manipulating people inside using only what he knows?
That's an interesting one. I think his personality is, from what we know about him, one of being quite manipulative. And I think there is evidence of him doing that over his career. So his natural tendency, yes. But will he be able to do it? I think he will struggle, because he will already have his back against the wall, because he'll already be really unpopular and a target for all the reasons that we've mentioned. So I think it's really hard to manipulate a person or a group of people when you're already fighting for your own survival and your own life. Having said all that, I think that he is rich, and I think he's got a lot of resources. So I don't know if you call that manipulation, because it's just technically just paying people, but he certainly has the resources and the ability to get people to help him if he gets money to the right people.
Why is this discovery coming out now instead of waiting until Trump's new DOJ is sworn in? Do you think that the timing of it, there's anything unusual about the timing of it?
Not really. I think that, like with all these cases, so if you look at Russell Brand, if you look at R. Kelly, it's a bit of a snowball effect. So there's often a massive lag between when these things happened and when people come out. Bill Cosby's another perfect example of this. And I think that's because one or two people, usually women, are quite scared to come out because they won't be believed. But if they know that other people have, then it gives them the kind of confidence to come out as well, that they will be believed and they won't be, you know, shamed or not taken seriously or mocked. So I think it's more organically to do when the first accusations come out. I think that's the timing, not anything to do with who's in charge.
Question from Martha. Dr. Das, he was open in interviews saying he would go to prison after the parties. He had joking attitude. Is that part of his narcissism?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen some videos where he's made slightly edgy jokes about him, what he's up to, being so crazy, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Jimmy Savile, because I'm sure he said, in fact, I think it was when he was being interviewed by, he's that really famous interview, the name just slipped out of my mind, the one with the glasses, Louis Theroux. When he was interviewed by Louis Theroux, he said something similar, didn't he, in the back of a taxi, like, you know, something about I've sinned so badly I'll be going to hell, or something like that. I think that, again, I don't know if you can read too much into that, because he is also portraying himself as a bit of literally a bad boy. Is the name of his record label, right? So I don't think that's like a, you know, sudden slip or admission of guilt or anything like that. And I don't think he's particularly showing off. I think it's just the phraseology that he's using. And another way of saying that is all, or not all, but the vast majority of rappers will say that they do things that are really controversial and that they're bad boys and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't necessarily mean that the vast majority of them are actually breaking the law or are committing SA. I think it's just the language they use.
Question from Seeger Frog. What will happen if he genuinely ends his life? Because people will not believe it, and two, people will still want justice for everything that went on.
Yeah, I think that, as we said before, there is a real risk that, right, so it all depends on the strength of the evidence. If there's really strong evidence against him now and he knows it, and he knows that the feds have got it, then I think that he's at high risk of ending his life right now. if there is strength of evidence against him, strong evidence, and he doesn't know that the feds have got it, have got access to it, and it does come out, and then he gets a really long prison sentence and he's targeted in prison, I also think that there's a pretty high risk. Having said all that, he is also quite narcissistic, and he's quite entitled, and people who are like that, who crave like attention and dominance and power, that actually tends to be a protective factor against suicide, simply because their self-esteem is so high, even though what they've done is horrific. They feel themselves so much that they don't want to end their lives. But to answer the question, what would that happen? What would happen? Even if he genuinely did that, I think that there would be a huge conspiracy theory against what happened. So people will assume that he has evidence against some higher ups, and the higher ups are scared of that leaking, so they have orchestrated that he dies, even if it was genuinely him. And as the person who asked the question rightly pointed out, I think it will leave a lot of people really angry and frustrated that he didn't serve justice, he didn't serve his prison sentence, just like happened with Jimmy Savile.
Question from Ken: can the doctor speak on prison staff corruption, and what effect that would have on Diddy doing hard or soft time?
Yeah, so I think it's fair for me to say that there is a high level of guards that are corrupt in, I think it would be fair to say, in most prisons, both in the States and the UK. There's a small proportion, but given the number of prisons there are and the number of staff members, I think that there are some in most prisons, and there's certainly a number of convictions, quite a high number of convictions every year. So again, it's all about money and resources. So if Diddy is holding on to his money, and if he's able to siphon it, not necessarily himself, but his people on the outside, if they can siphon it to the right people, then I think absolutely they can get to a corrupt guard. It'll take a while. It's not something that you can kind of test the waters on straight away immediately, but I don't think it's unfeasible that if he has the time and the resources, that he'll find ways of getting in contraband, etc.
Question from Benny: could Justin Bieber and Usher be called in as part of the prosecution's case?
I think absolutely. If they were privy to what was going on in these parties, if they have any kind of evidence, if they are linked to being present behind the freak-offs, which, as I would stress again, is different, I think, to the actual ordinary celebrity parties that he had. If they were involved in that, and they have any evidence, then absolutely they could be called. Yeah. There's no being like world famous or rich does not preclude you from being part of a criminal investigation if the feds think that you have evidence.
We've got almost 2,000 watching across all the platforms. Please check out a Psych for Sore Minds YouTube channel. That is Dr. Dassey's channel. He's been a friend of this channel for years. He's supported us now for a long time. So please show him some love right back. Dr. Dassey, you've been very generous with your time, as usual. And is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Shaun. So yeah, my YouTube channel is Psych for Sore Minds. I've been doing these kind of 5 myths. So in terms of criminal stuff, I've done 5 myths about snitches and informants, 5 myths about toxic masculinity, modern day slavery, 5 myths about cults, about gaslighting, about stalkers. So basically anything that I find interesting that's related to true crime or mental illness, I've probably made a video about it. And that's it. Thank you for having me on, Shaun. It's always a pleasure. I love having my chats with you. You ask very seeking questions.
Well, it's thanks to the viewers and all of the questions that really helped it. You know, they're really tuned into this case. It's resonating. And if there's any developments on your side, on what you've got your expertise in, hopefully we can get you back. Put a 1 in the chat if you'd like to see Dr. Das come back. If there's any developments, put a 2 in the chat if Dr. Das can bog off. I'm sure I can predict it's going to be nearly all ones. Thank you, Das. And Dr. Dassey's channel, if you are watching this on YouTube, Dr. Dassey's channel link is in the description box, as are the links to his socials. Yet you're just getting an outpouring of multiple 1s, and the moderators.
Thank God there's no 2s. That would have been embarrassing.
Yeah. Oh, Jabba put a 2. Bog off, Jabba. All right, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna close. I'm gonna close the show. I will let you go and stay in touch, my friend. You take care.
Cheers, Shaun. Always a pleasure. Cheers, mate. All the best. Bye.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.